All right, we are in Revelation chapter 16. We are going to start in verse 17, and I'll go ahead and read it to the end of the chapter. Here's what we read there. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne saying, "It is done." And then there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a severe earthquake. No earthquake like it has ever occurred since mankind has been on earth. So tremendous was the quake. And the great city split into three parts, and the cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. Every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found. From the sky, huge hailstones, each weighing about 100 pounds, fell on people, and they cursed God on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was so terrible. I think that, well, we'll talk about it, but I think it's interesting having golf-size hail compared to 100-pound hail. That would be an interesting, yes. All right, this is the seventh bowl. If we remember from last week, the sixth bowl included the gathering of the armies at Armageddon. And so what I say here is before the war can actually begin, the seventh bowl comes. And what does the seventh bowl say? It is done. It is finished, right? So this is, I'm sure it's the teleos, right? It is completed. Okay, so this is an end to the judgments. If we look at 15:1, where the bowls are introduced, it says these are the last because these are the last in which the wrath of God is completed, right? Is what 15:1 says. And so here we have the completion of that. This bowl is very similar to the seventh seal and trumpet, probably because they're all telling about the same thing. So all of them will have the flashes of lightning, peals of thunder, earthquakes, and so on and so forth. We just have an expanse of it. So, so very similar. Cosmological signs that are seen in the seventh seal and trumpet are re-seen in this bowl. The biggest difference is we have the worst ever earthquake ever, right? Which again is just talking about cosmological changes that point to judgments. Anytime we have cosmological changes, it's a judgment idea. Verse 19 says the great city splits. What's the great city here? Yeah, probably Babylon. So there are two cities in Revelation that are constantly contrasted. You have the heavenly Jerusalem and the great city of Babylon. Usually when we have great city, it's talking about Babylon in Revelation. So probably Babylon here. This also serves as an interlocking verse. So I've talked about these a couple of times, right? So the seventh seal had an interlocking verse pointing to the trumpets. I can't deal with markers that don't write. All right, there we go. I thought I did. I don't know. No. Pointing to the trumpets, same thing. We had the interlocking with the bowls, right? There was an interlocking verse pointing to the bowls, and now we have another one. So here at the seventh bowl, we got an interlocking verse that's going to point out to the next vision. So we've seen great city of Babylon the Great, or Babylon the Great, I guess is the phrase, in chapter 14, very briefly introduced, but chapter 17 is where we discuss it in great detail. So we're being introduced to the concept, and then it will be explained later. So I don't want to get too far into it because it gets explained next. There are other cities that are collapsing as well. More likely, this is a warning, right? So if you are aligning yourself with Babylon, looking for safety and security, the warning is compromising with the great world power for safety results in ruin. So these other cities that are connected to Babylon for safety and security, they are destroyed as a result. Lastly, verse 20 to 121, we're told that the islands fled away and the mountains are removed. This is a common theme in the Old Testament prophecy, very similar to what we saw at the end of the sixth seal in this says chapter 20. That's not right. Oh, no, sorry. And chapter 20. There's a conjunction there. So sixth seal has something very similar. Chapter 20 will see something similar. So this is the second of three ideas to talk about this. Changes in the earth indicate a change in creation's order, and so we should see this as kind of like the cosmological changes of lightning, thunder, all that stuff. Additionally, large hailstones fall. Where else have we seen large hailstones fall in the Bible? Yeah, Exodus, right? So we're again coming back to the Exodus where you had fire and hail fall from the sky, right? And so we have that coming back again. What is the result of this last bowl? How do the people react? Yeah, they blaspheme God again. They curse him again, right? And this is something that we got to keep in mind. Like even this probably end, right? The end, right? It is finished. If we didn't catch that before, this is the very last thing. And even then, in the end, idolaters will still continue to reject God. So even we sometimes get this idea that if they just saw God, they would repent, right? If Jesus would just show himself, they would repent and they would come and they would believe. But everything points to the contrary to that. Even if they did see God, even if they did see this final judgment and all these final things, they still would not repent. And so we have to keep that in mind. People that are just going to reject God are just going to keep rejecting God no matter what we do. And so if we're out there sharing the gospel and they reject it, we should not take that personally. Right? It's not our fault. It's something within them, and even God himself can't change it. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. All right, I know we did part of this last week. What can we learn? Anybody? Nobody? Okay, cool. Even in the end, repentance will be far from the hearts of wicked humanity is what I kind of focused on. And I think it helps us. It doesn't mean that we should give up on them in any way, shape, or form. You should never stop sharing the gospel. But at the same time, you really should not take it personally if people don't respond positively. It's just part of how we are as human beings right now. So. All right, so now we're going to enter into a new set of visions. There's a lot of provocative images out here. I got one that's less provocative because we're going to talk about a whore. So that's kind of, I had to choose the best that I could. So, all right, someone will read chapter 17, all of it.
One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on my waters. With her the king of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteresses." Then the angels carried me away in the spirit into the desert. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. It was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. She had a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of the adulteress. This title was written on her forehead: Babylon, the mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mysteries of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was not, now is not, and will come out of the abyss and go to the destruction. The inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life, from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, now is not, and yet will come. This call for a mind with wisdom. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other is not yet to come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose: they will give their power and authority to the beast. They will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be called chosen and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to give the beast their power to rule until God's word are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth.
All right, the passage begins with explaining that this is the judgment of Babylon the Great. We have mentioned her twice already, 14:8 and 16:19. What we have in this chapter is a vision of a theological interpretation of the last 2 bowls. So the last 2 bowls are judgment bowls, are end time stuff. And so one of the things that happens when you get to the 6th seal, you get this interlude that we call it, and it seems to be an interpretation of some of the things that have taken place. Same thing with the 6th trumpet. We get an interlude, and the interlude is an interpretation of some of this stuff. The bowls take a slight detour, and we get the 6th and 7th bowl together, and then we get what I would call an interpretation. And so that seems to be what's happening here is where these interludes in the past come in between the 6th and 7th of the previous judgments. This one is coming at the end. And so we have a theological reflection on these last 2 bowls. So he mentioned Babylon the Great. Hey, let's talk about that. That's kind of what's happening here. So it says he's a prostitute or a harlot or a whore who sits by many waters. This comes from Jeremiah 51:13, which in particular mentions Babylon. So Babylon, it's somewhere over here. Okay, it's off the map. But Babylon, you had the Euphrates River and you had Babylon, and they actually had built a bunch of canals throughout the city to kind of help with transportation. And so literally it was a city that sat on many waters. Okay, so that's when Jeremiah, he's using that phrase. He is discussing that. So why does he call her here the great prostitute? Any ideas?
Because she leads the Christians astray.
Okay, maybe she leads the Christians astray.
She had a lot of the other stuff.
Okay, maybe. So in the Old Testament, idolatry is often equated with adultery. And so if you have this idea of prostitution, you can have that. Additionally, in a lot of pagan temples, one of the ways in which you would worship the god is by having sex with a temple prostitute. So kind of a weird concept for us today, but it is something that happened on a pretty regular basis. And so this is definitely an idea of worship especially the Roman world. They would have understood this when he uses this phrase. And so I think that's what we're seeing here is whoever this Babylon is, she's enticing people to worship the beasts and the dragons for safety and security reasons. And we see that throughout the vision. through the different things that are happening. Verses 3 through 6 is kind of the big vision. I'm not going to dive into everything, but some of the things that aren't really explained that are necessary for us to understand, I do want to dive into that. The rest of the image is discussed in the chapter, and so that's what we're kind of focused on. First thing that happens is John is carried into the wilderness. There are some interesting aspects about that. First, the wilderness we saw in chapter 12 was a place of protection for God's people. So you had the woman that gave birth to the Christ child who is taken to the wilderness, and there she is protected. So the wilderness could be protection, but it definitely also brings clarity. And so anytime someone in the Bible is taken to the wilderness, usually it's for clarification reasons. So Elijah gets done with Mount Carmel incident, kills all the prophets of Baal. The queen says, I'm going to kill you just like you killed my prophets. And where does Elijah run to? To wilderness, right? And while he's there, he's saying, God's like, why are you here? And God says, Elijah says, well, I'm all by myself. And God, through a series of visions, clarifies to Elijah, no, you are not alone. Okay, so the wilderness brings clarity. And so that's probably what is happening here as John is gaining clarity. Underlying this is Isaiah 21:9. It kind of serves as a key phrase throughout the chapter. And it says this, Babylon has fallen, has fallen. And the beginning of the vision for Isaiah takes place in the wilderness, just like John's vision will. And so in chapter, I think, 18, we will hear this idea as fallen is Babylon the Great. And so that Isaiah passage is kind of undergirding this. This is the second woman in Revelation. The first woman was the one that gave birth to the Christ child. And so this is a compare-contrast for that. And so this, we're going to see a lot of this. She is riding a scarlet beast. Anybody know what that beast appears to be?
The one representing Satan?
No, not the dragon.
Scarlet, like royalty, isn't it?
All right, well, I'm talking about this beast has 7 heads, 10 horns. Have we seen a beast like that before? I know it's been a couple weeks. So in chapter 13, we had the beast of the sea, right? Lion's mouth and leopard's paws or bear's paws. And so what happens is in Daniel chapter 7, you have 4 beasts, right? And these beasts look different. Do you know how many heads those beasts have combined? Guess. Nope. 7. Do you know how many horns these beasts had? Just take a guess. 10, right? All right. So what happens is John in Revelation 13, and then here as well, takes Daniel's 4 beasts and puts them into one, combines them into one. And so the bear, the leopard, all those things, all the horns, all the heads, the lion's mouth, those are all the beasts of Daniel. Okay, and Daniel's beast represented what? We know what it represents. What does it represent? The nations, the 4 nations in particular, right? Babylon, Persia, Greece, and or Macedonia, and Rome, right? So we know that that's what those are. And so what John's doing is saying this beast of the sea represents any evil nation that's a set against God and God's people. Okay, all right. So that's the beast of the sea. It appears again here. And on top of that beast of the sea is this second woman. So scarlet beast riding the beast of the sea, the one from chapter 13. There are some minor differences between the two, but not enough that we should think of them as different. And so what we have to ask is, what does this second woman represent? And most likely, she is economic systems, and the way that we can do that is by what she appears like. Okay, she is dressed with the finest adornment, right? Gold, pearls, precious stones. All right. Even the scarlet robe or purple, it's purple, right? That she's wearing. This is all about wealth. Okay. And so within her religious institutions is the economic system of these nations. Okay. And so we see this as a part of who she is. Additionally, she's holding a golden cup, and all of it comes into mind this idea that she is leading people to economic success and through her system and her values. Okay. She's named Babylon the Great. This probably comes from Daniel 4. That's really the only place in the Old Testament where we hear Great Babylon. And that actually is Nebuchadnezzar looking at his kingdom and saying, look how great we are. I am in particular, right? And then he's judged for it. All right. In John's day, Babylon represents Rome. I have it up there. Yeah. And we know this. We know this for sure, and I'll explain that in a second, why we know that this is Rome that he's talking about. She's also called the mother of prostitutes and abominations. Again, idol worship tended to include temple prostitutes. And so as the mother of prostitution, we are talking about not just economic, but also religious economics. All right, and so there is a strong connection between economics and religion. And I know that we like to, in America, say separation between the two, but there is still a connection. And if you're not worshiping the right thing, then you end up not having the economic success that you might want. Let's see here. We can also say that woman is probably trans-temporal, meaning that she is not just one historical system, but any historical, economic, religious system that is opposed to God and God's people. We're told that she is drunk with the blood of God's people. Drinking blood in first century world was an idiom for oppression. Okay, so if someone's drinking blood, they're not literally drinking blood. What they're doing is they're oppressing people. Okay, and that's kind of the phrase, the idiom in the Greek for that. All right, so those are some of the things that's not pointed out later on, but that are important for us to gain a better understanding of who this woman is and what she kind of represents. John, when he sees her, has a certain response, and the angel tells us. Oh wait, it says that John. It tells us at the very end there, verse 6, that he was astonished. Right, greatly astonished is what my version says. The angel comes in verse 7, and what does he say? Why are you astonished? I'll tell you the mystery, right? This is very much comes from Daniel 7. Daniel 7 sees a vision of 4 beasts, okay? And then he looks at it, and he's like, I don't know what was going on. I'm perplexed. I prayed about it. I fasted. And then an angel comes to Daniel and says, I'll tell you what it means, okay? So very similar. John often throughout Revelation is trying to say that he is the same as the Old Testament prophets. He's placing himself in that same company. And this is just another one of those ways in which he does that. John is astonished, and we should be asking a question. What makes him astonished? Okay, maybe the magnitude of it. Maybe he's confused by it all. Okay.
The things he's seen, the way, like with the different, so many heads and so many horns.
Okay, yeah, that'd be kind of weird. What is this beast? Yeah, I can see that. So I think there's two key ideas here. Either he is in fear of this woman, right? That'd be kind of fearful just to kind of see. Or he is mesmerized by her. Okay, so one of the things that we need to recognize is everything that he sees in this woman is very enticing in reality, right? Gold, pearls, precious stones, purple, like all those are enticing aspects. And yeah, she's drinking the blood of the saints, but beyond that, like she's very mesmerizing. And so maybe his astonishment is thinking, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's not as bad as it looks. And maybe that's what he's having here. I think we have probably a mixture of the two. Not only is he maybe thinking it's not as bad, but he's also fearful of the power that she wields, because she definitely wields some power. She's riding this beast, right? And so maybe a mixture of both. Either way, the angel comes and he says he is going to explain this mystery. So that's what the rest of the chapter kind of does. It explains the mystery. Now, the vision starts off being a vision of what again? What does it say that is a vision of? Chapter, verse 1. What does it say it's a vision of? The great prostitute. I'll call it Babylon, right? All right.
There's a lot of things there, Tony.
Well, at the very beginning, it says, let me show you what happens to the prostitute who sits on many waters, right? I will show you the prostitute. And then throughout most of this chapter, who does he talk about? The beast that she's riding. You weren't paying attention. So what's interesting is I want to show you this, and then he talks about the beast more than the prostitute, which is fascinating. But I think the reason he does this is he wants us to understand the relationship between the two. Okay? So here's the prostitute. Here's her relationship to the beast, which is world powers set against God and God's people. And so what is the relationship that they have? So we're going to talk about the beast here. The first thing that he says about the beast in verse 8 is that he was, now is not, and yet is to come, and yet will come. What does that kind of sound like from Revelation?
A lot of dead come back.
No? I'm sorry, what? I heard a lot of things there.
It sounds like Jesus comes back when you say that.
Yeah, to some extent, I could see that. What was the threefold refrain that's used of God over and over and over again? No? Throughout Revelation. Yeah, who was and is to come, right? Like this sounds very similar to that phrase used over and over again. However, it's coverted, right? What's that? What'd you say? My wife is
She's got a
arguing.
B today. We'll keep going.
She's arguing here.
No, I'm saying that's what you're saying.
Oh, okay. But it's God, not Jesus.
Same thing.
Same
Yes,
thing.
God.
Same thing.
Is it the Father and not Jesus?
Sure. Yes. Okay. It's not used of Christ in this book. It's used of God. Okay. All right. I'm just not going to go there. All right. Yeah. And so we're going to see this used throughout the passage. It's repeated a couple of times, but it's also repeated in different words as well. And so this phrase is actually very, very important. One of the things that we have to remember is the beast and the dragon imitate God, but do it imperfectly, right? They're not perfect. It's not a perfect imitation. So it's imitating, but it's not quite there. The beast will come for destruction, not victory, right? Yet will come, and that coming will be its destruction. Compared to Jesus, right? When he comes, there's victory. All right, and so we have a difference there, and so we're going to see that played out. He also says the inhabitants of the earth, whose names are not written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished. So these are inhabitants of the earth. This is a technical phrase used throughout Revelation for non-Christians. All right, so if you're a non-Christian, you're an inhabitant of the earth in Revelation, and it says that they are amazed by the beast who was, is not now, and will come. Yeah, will come. Okay. It probably also fits. This is the same beast of the sea in Revelation 13. I guess I can go there. The descriptions are just too similar to not do it. The beast is based off Daniel 7, which we talked about, ungodly kingdoms. I think this is trans-temporal, so we're not just talking about the four kingdoms of Daniel, but any kingdom. I think the reason why John combines those is just to say any kingdom that's opposed to God and God's people is this beast. Okay? And so we see it over and over again. It does have a current form when John's writing. And the current form is who again? Rome. In the current form that John is writing, it's Rome. How do we know it's Rome from verse 9? There's 7 hills. Do you know how many hills are in Rome? 9, but they always said 7. Any of their writers said 7. It's weird, right? There's actually 9, but they only count 7 of them. Okay, so it's interesting. But even in their writings, they are the city set on 7 hills. Now, why would they do that? Well, 7 is not just a perfection for Jewish people; it's an idea of perfection for Roman people as well. Okay, so it's not too far of a leap for a Roman citizen to read Revelation and catch on to some of these numbers things. Okay, so Rome is the city that's set on 7 hills. And so this 7 heads being 7 hills, John's, without saying this is Rome, is saying this is Rome, right? Not using those words, but clearly identifying Rome as this beast. Okay, now we get to the fun stuff. Verse 10 is one of the more controversial verses in this section, especially as we're trying to identify what's going on here. The problem comes if we try to read this literally, right? It says 5 kings are dead, 1 is now, and 1 will come in a little while. So let's figure out what kings there are. So I have a handout here. Of all the emperors of Rome, it is important that we understand that none of the emperors until much later called themselves kings, and there's a very good reason for that. Rome, when it became a republic, they killed off their kings because they were evil. And so there is no true Roman that's going to say, hey, I'm a king. Instead, Caesar, Julius Caesar, when he became emperor, called himself the dictator for life. Dictator was something that they did have. It was a general of the armies, and they voted on them once a year. So you could be the head guy of the armies one year and not the next year, just depending on how the vote went. All right, and usually they picked the best general, and Caesar definitely showed that. So when he took over Rome, he said, don't call me king, just call me a dictator for life. Augustus, same thing. He takes on the name dictator for life and does not call himself king. Then the later ones all take on the name imperator, okay, which is emperor. Okay. Now, when we were talking about it, when the Germans started becoming emperors, they started calling themselves king, but by that time, they were already kings in practice, if not in name. So, all right. So, what 7 kings? Do we include Julius Caesar? Do we not include him? Because really, Augustus is the first emperor, not Julius Caesar. Do we skip all the way to Caligula, who's one of the worst of those first emperors? Do we have to skip the year of the 4 emperors to make this match up? John is probably writing in the time of Domitian, so 80 to 90, probably 90, 92. And so to get him to be 6, you have to start with Caligula and skip the year of the 4 emperors, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, to make it work. So there's some problems here, I think, if we are talking about literal kings of Rome. Okay, so there's a lot more reasons we shouldn't probably do that, but let's just start with that. It's hard to make it match up. You have to pick and choose which ones are going to be the kings. Literal kingdoms or empires, okay, we might be able to get Rome to be the 6, right, because there are 5 that are gone, 1 that is to come. So we have to get to 6. So if you have the Hittites, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greek or Macedonians, and Rome, that gets you 6. But what's the kingdom that is going to be yet to come? No, this is an evil kingdom. Russia, okay. Ottoman Empire. We're going to ignore everything that's happening out west or out east of this area, like all the Chinese empires that dominated probably more land than the Romans ever had. I mean, which empires do we include and don't include? All right, there's some things there. What I think probably here is we should not read this literally, but rather see it as a play on the previous phrase, right? Who once was, is now not, and is yet to come. And that we see that phrase just in a different way, right? 5 are gone, 1 is yet to come. You see that? You hear that phrase? And so we're probably talking about here is not a literal kingdom or literal kings, but rather any political system opposed to God. Now, it doesn't mean that we should not think about a great end time kingdom. I think we see aspects of that throughout the New Testament, but I think we could read it in a different way as well. The beast is said to be the eighth king, which is from the seven, either as a literal descendant, which makes it, again, kind of hard to figure out who that is, or probably more likely a spiritual kingdom, right? They are spiritually aligned in what is going on. So here's where I'm at. So in 1 John 2:18, you have this passage that says, "You have heard that the Antichrist is coming, and even now there are many Antichrists." And I think we have this same kind of idea. You have heard that there is a great kingdom coming that will be opposed to God, and even now there are many kingdoms that are opposed to God. And I think we should read it in that mindset. Okay, it's not one kingdom, it's one kingdom in particular, but any kingdom that's set against. Now, why would he say, that still leaves us with the question, why would he say 5 are gone, 1 is, 1 yet to come? And that doesn't include the 8th. If you just read this phrase, what is your initial feeling?
7 kings.
End is near.
What is that?
End is near.
The end is near, right? Like that should be the initial feeling and the emotion that probably John is trying to communicate, or the angels communicating to John. It's near. It's close. All right? Babylon's about to be judged. It's close. Okay? And I think that's probably the reason he does it the way that he does it. Okay? So I don't think a literal, I think more of that spiritual aspect and with the understanding that we are close. All right? And even now, closer than what we were before, right? I think 1 John 4:3 says something similar. The spirit of the Antichrist is already at work in the world, is what it says. But you still have that sense that there is one great final person against God, especially the man of lawlessness from 1 Thessalonians, right? So there is this sense that there's something coming, but doesn't mean that it's not at play already. And we need to keep that in mind. All right, there's still stuff at play now that we should be aware of. Verse 12. Oh, good. I was trying to see if we can get through this chapter. Verse 12, I think it's the same concept as the 7 kingdoms. 7 and 10 carry the same idea of perfection. And again, rather than looking at particular people or anything like that, we should just recognize that horns represent power, and these are people desiring power. And we can see a lot of that at play. Verse 13 through 14 tells us what the purpose of the kings are. What's the purpose of these kings? Yeah, to give authority to the beasts. All right, they might be seeking their power for their own reasons, but the reality is that they're going to give it to the beast, right? They don't end up keeping it for themselves. And so we kind of see that happening here. We do have hints of a battle mentioned, but no battle comes, no battle comes because the Lamb triumphs, right? They will wage war, but the Lamb wins and when he returns. Verse 15. Yeah, okay. Verse 15, now after talking about the beast, we finally see about this great prostitute who sits on many waters, right? Again, I think a lot of this is showing the relationship between the beast and this woman. Sits on waters, in particular, is talking about people, multitudes, nations, languages, all right? And so this person has influence over the world. Again, probably Rome is in mind in some way here. There are some out there that would say that maybe this is apostate church because unfaithful Israel in the Old Testament is called a prostitute. And so while you could say that, reality is that it probably fits better with ungodly economic systems and religion that's connected to it. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. All right, verse 16. Despite the fact that the woman provides prosperity to the beasts and to the everyone associated with the beasts, how do they react to the woman? They hate her, right? They hate her, and they bring her ruin. That's the word that I'm looking for. The ruin includes being naked, having flesh eaten, and being burned. This is highly influenced by Ezekiel 23. God warns Israel that they're about to be judged, and when judgment comes, they will be dragged out naked, and their houses would be burned. Additionally, there's a lot of parallels to one particular woman in the Old Testament. Does anybody know who is dragged naked and flesh eaten? Jezebel. Okay? So there's a lot of similarities to Jezebel, even in her appearance. Okay? Jezebel, before her death, here, I got a list here. Before her death, Jezebel colored her eyes and adorned her head as if she was just like this harlot looks like, right? Before she walked out to meet the people, and then they killed her. Okay? So it didn't work. Both are queens. Both seduce people. Both are guilty of fornication, especially spiritual fornication of idolatry, so leading people into idolatry. Both are deceive people by sorceries. Both seek greedily for economic prosperity. Both persecuted God's people. A remnant refuses to participate in the harlot's sin. God avenges on both the blood of his servants shed by them. The destruction of both occurs quickly. God judges the followers of both, and both have their flesh eaten. All right, so we see a lot of similarities between these two. Not that she is, but rather that she is modeled after. And we actually have seen Jezebel in chapters 2 and 3. We had some letters to the churches, and in those letters included the idea of Jezebel. So this isn't a new idea. If we had read this book straight through, it would have popped up before, and we would have her in the back of our mind when we got to this point. All right, the last two verses of the chapter, we're told that God places their action into their hearts, right? It says God put it into their hearts to accomplish this person of destroying the woman Jezebel. And so even in their actions, God is in control, all right? And this is despite their desire for sovereignty. Most of these people probably think that I am doing this so I can gain power, so I can have control, so I can rule. That's why we're destroying this prostitute, so that I can be in charge of myself. But the reality is God is still in control, even in those actions. Lastly, verse 8, through the hints that are given, we know this is Rome. So verse 18 there, the woman you saw is the great city that rules the kings of the earth. It's another hint that this is Rome. All right, before we go into what we can learn, we do need to look at the fact that there are two women in Revelation, and they have a lot of similarities between them. And there's a lot of differences as well. And so I want us to look just at the two similarities and differences. Chapter 12 is where we see the introduction of the other woman. She's brought back in chapter 21, slightly in a different way. But it's both of them. So some of the comparing and contrasting, one is a pure bride and a mother of legitimate children, while the other one is considered an impure whore called a prostitute. Babylon is dressed in bejeweled attire to hide her corruption, while the bride is adorned in costly jewels to emphasize her glorious nature. And so that's something that's very interesting. When you get to chapter 21, we get this picture of the bride, and she is wearing gold, pearls, precious stones, which is the exact same thing that the prostitute is wearing, right? So same description, but the reason why they're described with the same stones are different. One is to hide corruption, one is to emphasize the glorious nature. Both are persecuted mothers, if you will, both by the beast, which is ironic, or the dragon, I guess, for the one woman. The bride is rescued, though, while the whore is destroyed. The bride has security in heaven, while Babylon seeks security in the multitudes and the kings of the earth, as we'll see in the next couple of chapters and the next couple of weeks. Babylon is seen in the desert, which is likewise true for the bride. So there's a lot of similarities, but there's slight enough differences. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that just because something looks like it's the bride, it could be the whore instead. And so we have to use discernment when we're deciding who we're going to follow and where we're going to be led to. And I think that's what John's trying to do with all of these similarities. Are you going to compromise with the world, or are you going to stay faithful? And it sometimes looks the same. You just have to dive deeper into what's going on here. All right, what can we learn from chapter 17?
Everything has to be a copy of God.
Okay, if it's not from God, it just might be a copy of it. So one of the interesting things that was happening, I don't hear a lot about it now, but there for a while, groups of atheists were gathering together on Sunday morning to sing and to talk and to give each other encouragement. They weren't singing worship songs; they were just singing whatever songs they liked that particular week. But it's interesting that they were imitating what we do in church, but not wanting to be associated with the church, if that makes sense. Again, I don't see a lot about it.
Well, what's the name for it? Like Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, all of those copy and do the same thing
Yeah.
as well.
My husband's nephew one time, when he was not a Christian and Glenn was talking to him about the Lord, he mentioned, and this of course would have been years ago, back in the 70s, he lived in Sheridan, and he says, well, Uncle Glenn, even in Haiti, we have the Lord's Supper.
In Hades?
In Haiti. No, not Haiti.
The country?
Haiti, the country.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was like,
Yes,
oh, man,
yes.
okay.
There were people in Haiti, and you know, the voodoo
Yeah.
religion is very strong there.
Yeah.
And they apparently had a copy of the Lord's Supper, like the Christians do.
Interesting.
I've always wondered if there's a true atheist. I mean, why do they fight so hard against God if they don't believe in Him?
Yeah. Agnostic are more atheistic than in their actions than atheists. I can see that.
Not always said there was no atheists in Oxford.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that saying before. I have here, trust in the economic systems of the world will eventually falter, whereas trust in the Lamb whose reign is eternal. That's what we should do instead. And I think that's what John's trying to accomplish in this. So,
But, you know, the word atheist is kind of funny. It's like you decide who your God is. Is it going to be worldly stuff? Is it going to be money? Is it going to be naturalism or whatever it is? What do you want your God to be? Do you want it to be the creator like we believe, or whatever you spend all your time with is what your God is, whether you call it that or not?
yeah, and Christianity and Judaism teach that exact thing, right? Like we all worship something and devote ourselves to that something. What are we going to devote ourselves to? I think that's a good point. So.